Alors nous allons passer maintenant.
So we're now going to move on to the following topic, the use of personal health data. What European safeguards exist? And we'll be interviewing Giovanni Buttarelli, and I'm going to invite Freddy Abnouzi, Cathy Apostolidis, David Grouzon, Gaspard Koenig, Eric Léandri, with the video link. So if you'd all be so kind as to come up and sit down around the table. And the debate will be moderated by Didier Bazocchi. Continue. Do you remember when the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, came into force a few months ago? Remember all those emails and all those sites asking you to accept their new terms of use? Come on, admit it. After the 10th half-page message, you clicked on accept without reading the details. Oh, yes. Even when you're well-informed, all it takes is a click to accept that your personal data be collected and processed. And yet, the data that we're giving away with barely a second thought is a copy of ourselves that ends up completely qualifying who we are. A little like human blood, really. In the 1950s, when the legislation governing blood donations was written, legal experts found it difficult to define this vital fluid, this self beyond the self that is not quite a person or a simple thing, or a type of merchandise. Almost 70 years later, personal data is raising the same questions. We can give them, but should we necessarily have the possibility of selling them? Should every citizen have property rights over them, or should they be a common good that the state must protect? In France, it's clearly the latter option that is prevailing. It has its drawbacks. Even though it was simplified a year ago, the procedure to access anonymous and non-re-identifiable health data remains fastidious and slow. In countries like China and the US, they're not placing these types of spanners in the works of medical teams, patients, and the health industry that need this data to improve the performances of our healthcare system.
Bonjour, nous allons commencer par une interview.
So hello, we'll begin with an interview of the European Data Protection Advisor for the European Union. We're going to be able to connect. Would you like to speak French? I would like to speak French, but unfortunately, my French is not good enough. So I will speak French, and you can answer in English if you like. That's fine. So you're the European Data Protection Advisor. You have set up in May 2018 GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. Europe is it fully playing its role in protecting its citizens on their basic rights? And if I click on my smartphone and I say yes without reading the use conditions, I can send my data concerning my weight, my blood pressure. What happens to this information, and what guarantee do I have that they're not sold to a foreign insurance company or a solution provider or another company? So what does GDPR provide in addition to the previous regulations? Many things, and thank you for letting me speak in English. To say that there's a big change coming.
The 5th of May this year, in Europe, data protection and privacy has been treated as complementary to the free movement of services, goods, persons, capitals, so largely oriented to protect consumers, subscribers, users. But now, because of the Lisbon Treaty, we are protected as persons. The GDPR makes our rights more effective in practice. We debureaucratize we make data protection digital. So we depart from formalities. We concentrate more on effective safeguards. There is much more attention to the person, the individual, his dignity. We should all be better informed in a plain language about the consequences of our behaviors online. And now there is much more harmonization. The European law is to be applied to everybody in the world offering goods and services remotely or profiling people. So till the 25th of May, it has been very difficult, not only in the health sector, to protect people with regard to processing of personal data made by controllers, data controllers established outside the EU. But now this is much more easier. So from Facebook to Amazon, from Apple to Google, and of course, the big giants in the health sector is much easier.
Très bien, donc c'est un progrès.
So that's progress that's been made, but for health data, not everything is clear yet and regulated, and the EU is waiting for proposals from the states to complete the measures. Can you say more about that today, please?
Since the regulation has identified 4 or 5 areas where the message is here there is much more diversity at national level, and therefore member states have been granted with a margin of maneuver on scientific research and health data. The pillars are in the GDPR, so it's clear, for instance, that both for medical care but also for scientific purposes there are specific safeguards, and there is a good balance in between the protection of individuals but also the future of research. I'm going to publish by next week a big document subject to public consultation to encourage epidemiologists, scientists, researchers to make profit of the opportunities offered by the GDPR. We are now considering the 27 laws already adopted. Only Romania is late in doing what they should do. What is essential is that now we speak about with one voice. Genetic data, for instance, cross-border research. We cannot operate by fragmenting practices because Europe should speak with one voice. So we need to incentivize accountability. We need to treat data controllers as adults. We need to identify the clear borderline in between truly scientific research purposes and other research which may have an adverse effect on the individuals, because the special regime can be different in one of the 2 cases. So please consider all the opportunities you have for a lighter approach in terms of pseudonymization of the data, in terms of anonymization, in terms of certification, accreditation, codes of conduct. Don't wait for guidelines by independent legislators or regulators. Do your job and communicate a sustainable approach in protecting the data. And I think it will contribute a lot to also prevent member states to do more.
Très bien, merci. Je vais revenir un instant sur...
I'd like to come back to the current situation. When someone using the internet in Europe transfers data on a website that is based outside of the European Union, and the web user doesn't know this, is the data truly protected? The American Privacy Act only presents American citizens residing in the United States. So how does the GDPR solve this problem at a practical level?
Of novelties On the one hand, we have much more flexibility in making use of different requirements to transfer the data outside the EU. But differently from what happened until the 24th of May, we take care of what happens in the recipient country. So there are companies which are subject to the GDPR in its entirety. So not only when the data are transferred to, for instance, the United States. And second, if you have a controller operating in Europe but not established in Europe, they have to appoint a representative. Last Wednesday, together with my 28 fellows, we have adopted a draft guidelines on the territorial scope of the GDPR. And there are important examples concerning the health sector. These guidelines are now published for consultation, and I hope from your very interesting word we may have a contribution. Please read the document and jump in with useful comments.
Alors, une dernière question, Monsieur le Contrôleur, pour vous faire...
A last question that might bring a smile to your face. American law, as you know, has a different idea of privacy as we imagine it in Europe. We often say that in Europe we protect individual data as citizens under the rule of law, but the U.S. protects their consumers on a more market-based attitude. And yet, we're starting to hear that GDPR could be a reference base for future American legislation. That would be a real recognition. Is this serious? Are you optimistic about this?
You should not say that to the Americans. A few weeks ago, my good friend Tom Wheeler, former chairman of the Federal Communication Commission, published an editorial on the New York Times after the Cambridge Analytica case to say why US should not have a similar law to protect individuals here at federal level in the US. We have been invited to appear before the Senate, the Commerce Committee, in few days from now to, let's say, orient them to design a federal approach. We counted recently 128 countries in the world, 71 outside Europe, geographically speaking, which are now equipped with a modern generation of data protection rules. So they not only relate to privacy, but also to how, when, by whom, for which purposes, for how long time certain data are processed. And US is now in a splendid isolation. EU is going to sign soon a trade agreement with Japan based on data protection as well. So we are in a difficult situation by a technological viewpoint, but in terms of values, we take the lead. What is essential is that we now continue to lead by example, that we have a flexible approach. We treat small and medium enterprises also in the health sector differently from the tech giants. We make these safeguards reasonable, reliable, effective in practice. People is annoyed by saying, I consent, I consent, I consent, and then there is nothing special. So if we have a reflection also on our ethical values, I think Europe may compensate the digital gap.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Contrôleur, pour votre...
Thank you, sir, for your work. And would you like to say a few words to conclude, and then we will start our discussion based on your what you've said to us. I hope I'll be able to speak French with you next time. Thank you.